Such a pleasure chatting with you, Mr. Seshasayee. Tell us, how has this transition been for you from, you've been associated with the manufacturing sector for years now, and now to be, in charge of, not operationally, but still in charge of one of this IT giants, so to say. How has this transition been for you?
Exciting. I think there is so much of learning and so much is happening in this industry. I enjoy this learning and the new challenges that you have in a very unique organization. And in any case, it's such a matter of pride to be associated with an iconic company like Infosys. So I'm enjoying it thoroughly.
So the 2 months so far have been good?
Well, I've been, as you know, on the board for more than 4 years now. So it's not a new company, but these are new landscapes that we have. The business landscapes are new. It's a new model in the sense that we don't have the founders anymore on the board and the management. So new responsibilities. So in that sense, yes, it is new.
In fact, Infosys has seen a lot of change and transition over the last 2 years at the board level, at the management level, even in terms of strategy. Now that you've taken charge, now that you have a new firm CEO as well, does this in a sense mark the closure of the transition phase for Infosys, according to you?
There can never be a closure. The future has to be written on the foundations of the past. And again, a company like Infosys has had such a glorious past. The kind of benchmarks that it has set in several things, values, governance, technology leadership, execution efficiency, all of these are very strong foundations on which the future has to be built. So there's never a closure. But as I said, it is a new paradigm. We have to write new chapters. But will definitely be grounded on the extraordinary work done by the founders of this institution.
But the reason I ask is that from an investor point of view, because there's been, at least at the board level and the management level, a fair amount of churn, so to say. Does this, in a sense, signal that there will be continuity from here on? I think that's the reason I asked this question.
Well, I think any organization should have stability of leadership, stability of governance, in order to be focused on the business. In that sense, yes, certainly I hope to have stability. We have an extraordinary leader. Vishal is very committed. We have an excellent leadership team. There will, of course, be some churn that is a part of the process of changing. That is the process of growing up. But save that, yes, I do think that we will have a stable environment.
You know, your predecessor, Mr. Kamath, often used to tell us that his style of leadership, when he was the chairman of Infosys, was a very light touch management style. Is that something that you believe in as well? What would be your management style as the chairman of the company?
In a way, I think the board has three responsibilities. Any board of any company has three responsibilities. One is the leadership. Ultimately, it's the board that has to take responsibility for choosing the leadership. The second is the strategy to add shareholder value. We can't shy away if the shareholder value is not coming up to the expectations. And thirdly, governance, providing the right kind of moral compass, right kind of value systems and governance. Now, in that sense, when things are going right, the board has to have a light touch. There is no reason for the board to interfere if you have the right leader giving the right shareholder value, governance is good. You've got to be vigilant, but not certainly be intrusive. But the nature of the board responsibility is such that, that this is somewhat plastic. If something is likely to go wrong, or you anticipate some erosion in any of this, then I think it's ultimately the responsibility of the board to intervene with the right touch, light or hard, I don't know, with the right touch to make things happen the right way.
So right now, is it light touch or right touch?
Right now, I think it's light touch because I think we have an extraordinary leader and the board is fully supportive of the strategy that he has articulated to achieve the kind of targets that he has set for himself and for the company. And of course, we have a very strong bedrock of very good governance.
You know, as someone who's been entrusted with the responsibility of managing shareholders' expectations on the board, what's your mandate to Vishal Sikka? Would it be to restore the company to its bellwether status? What would be your mandate to the CEO?
You know, it's the board's and the CEO's joint goal. I won't call that as my mandate or even the board's mandate, but I think this has been a goal that we have jointly scripted, and that clearly is to take leadership. Take leadership not merely as a bellwether company in India, but to be known as a leader in the IT industry, and to regain what the founders of this company so appropriately described as a vision to be as the most respected company. And you get respect only if you're a leader, and that's precisely what the goal is.
So this is leadership both in absolute and relative terms. So it's not just how Infosys has fared compared to what it was a few quarters back, but also compared to its peers, say at TCS, Cognizant.
Yeah, I would say that yes, there is a leadership in as much as the growth rates and the profitability ratios and all of that would indicate that's one part of that. But I think leadership also is in terms of imagining the future, taking the leadership positioning in scripting a new chapter for not merely for the company but for the industry and for the client. Those are the kind of things, yardsticks by which companies get ultimately measured for respect. It's not merely in quarterly numbers. I think so we ought to go beyond that, and that's precisely the way we are going.
You know, Infosys also seems to be getting the RSU culture back by giving these out to senior management as part of the salary structure. Help us understand, are these tied to tenure, to retain people, or are these tied to performance?
You know, Sandeep, this company, don't forget, was the pioneer in getting the staff to participate in the shareholder value creation. I think the credit must go to this extraordinary founders who made this happen in this country. So all that is now happening is to put that back again, to say that we need to revive that spirit. So we're not making a distinction between owners and investors and employees. I think there must be some blending, some way that all of them are seen to be the same. We'd like the staff to look at this as being owners. We want the investors to look at this as owners, and we want all of us to believe that there is one common goal, and it's RSU is very much a part of that. It will stay.
Right. Since you spoke about the founders, you know, while they've completely disengaged from the company, and in fact they've even sold some part of their holding in the company as well, but they still, you know, many would say they still have a moral authority on the company as founders. And you know, in your address in the annual general meeting, you referred to Mr. Murthy as the Bhishma Pitama. As the chairman, do you still reach out to him, take some advice once in a while?
You know, there is a very clear line in this. It was Mr. Murthy who laid down the principles of corporate governance. And that is to make all the information about the company transparent to the investors. As I said earlier, the promoters of this company took an extraordinary step of looking at themselves as trustees, not as owners. And therefore, they made sure that all the information is available transparently to all the investors. At the same time, it was Mr. Murthy who laid down the principle that there is going to be no asymmetry of information between one group of shareholders and another group of shareholders. What we lay out is open to everyone.
Sure.
That principle has not changed. And if the credit should go to somebody, it should go to the promoters, because they haven't put any pressure on any of us to have any asymmetry of information to them as opposed to the general investing public. That is an extraordinary trait, and we respect that. And we are bound by those principles of governance.
So even if there is no asymmetric flow of information, within the symmetric flow of information or whatever, is there some communication? Do you reach out at times to Mr. Murthy, or has he completely disengaged and there is no conversation also?
You know, I certainly reach out, and will reach out to Murthy when I need advice. But that is different to saying that we reach out from the point of view of running a business. I think the two are very different. He is an extraordinary person. He's a very wise person, and therefore his guidance will be necessary and useful. But that's something that we have to choose.
Sure. The other thing that I want to talk about is the board is, even as a large section of shareholders believe in Vishal Sikka's strategy of actually, these selective acquisitions, investing in startups, etc., a section of the shareholders are concerned about the use of the cash pile. And, two illustrious former CFOs wrote to the board, asking them, putting pressure, so to say, for a potential buyback. What's the board's view on this? When would you take a call on this, if at all?
Well, I think the board has thought about this. This is certainly on the agenda. Our view is that we have a certain level of cash pile, which is very comfortable. In fact, the belief in this company has always been that you ought to have a certain months or certain years of expenditure available to you as cash. That's coming from another industry, that this is an extraordinary position to be in, but I respect that. But we also believe that piling idle cash beyond the point is counterproductive, does not add to the shareholder value, which is why we have articulated already some part of this policy, of the capital allocation policy.
Moving away from Infosys to industry issues, I'm sure you must be very disappointed at the legislative logjam that we've seen in the monsoon session of Parliament, which has led to the GST almost getting stalled.
I'm, like millions of other Indians, I feel extremely anguished, because I don't look at this as a GST issue. I don't even look at this as a monsoon session having been wasted. I look at this as a fundamental distrust that we would begin to see in the parliamentary democracy process. Are we a dysfunctional democracy? Are we saying that despite a majority government, and this is the only hope for us, despite a majority government, we cannot get legislations done. We cannot work functionally the parliamentary process. That, to my mind, is an extremely disturbing thought.
So, there is talk of a special session of Parliament towards the later half of this month, but are you hopeful that GST will go through? And the reason I'm talking GST is because it is a game-changing reform which everyone acknowledges. Are you still hopeful that it will meet its deadline?
Sandeep, again, I want to slightly differ in this. GST is, of course, a game-changing thing. There's no question about it. You know that I've also been very involved in advocating this for many, many years. But GST should not be looked at as something that will happen on Monday morning with 2% increase in GDP.
Sure.
Because the way that we have constructed the GDP, the GST is something that will have to evolve. It's not a perfect solution yet. We have some imperfections, but it is practical. It's a good way to begin. I think it's a right decision taken by the government that greatness should not be the enemy of goodness, so we should start with something which is good but not great, but it has to evolve. So therefore, GST is certainly game-changing, but when we take all the steps to make that happen and unify the market seamlessly, that's when we will begin to see results. When the links in the chain are not broken, everything is encompassed. Therefore, you can make sure that every business transaction is captured and the legitimate tax on that is collected by the government. When that happens, yes, this will be a purely game-changing situation. So we have to be patient to reap the benefits of that, but the very fact that we are delaying this process is a great
Do you fear it won't meet the April 1, 2016
I think it will. I think it will.
Sure. You spoke at length about the legislative logjam, and I know you're not a political expert, but do you also believe that, while much of the blame lies on the opposition for having stalled the session entirely, but it's also the onus is of the government to get business done, could have reached out more given the political mandate and the urgency of these reforms?
I think, I'm glad that you said I'm not a political expert, so I can clothe my views within that ignorance. At the end of the day, whether it is the opposition or the government, both need to come together. It's not just one person coming together. Both need to come together. And it's true of the earlier government, it's true of this government. And the fact that this has not happened is something which I won't assign the responsibility to one person. If a marriage is to work, both parties have to come together. I mean, it's no way that you can say that the marriage has failed because it's one party. I think there is a certain responsibility cast on both, and I think both have not done enough on this. But I remain confident that it will happen.
You don't believe right now there is just all talk and very little action? And let me tell you, I mean, let's talk of issues that have happened. The Nestle case, for example, you know, a giant MNC, so to say, the way, you know, the entire issue got blown out of proportion, the product got banned, the company was, you know, virtually targeted, as some may say. This doesn't help in creating an environment, you know, for attracting. The way the government handled the entire minimum alternate tax, MAT controversy, again spooked for investors. So, you know, it leads one to question what has changed other than intent.
You know, there is a big conundrum in this. The conundrum is like this. There are two conundrums actually. One conundrum is that you have to go by the rule of law, however bad the law is, right? Now, to say that this law is bad and therefore is preventing somebody doing his business here or preventing someone coming into this country, and therefore we will turn a blind eye to that, is not a correct way of doing it. The right way of doing that is to change the law. I mean, if you say in the Maggie case, I think there's a lot of confusion about whether the lab tests were correctly done, whether the standards that are being applied here are consistently being applied, and so on and so forth. So the instruments that support the enforcement of law are not in place. The law is good, but the instruments of support are not there, then it again creates a problem. So there are therefore expedient solutions that the government has to take. That's a conundrum. Now, how can you say that I'm committed to the rule of law but I have to take an expedient solution because I don't want to offend the sentiment? So whether it's in MAT or this is a conundrum. So this is a very tricky path. And I think the government has traveled this tricky path reasonably well. There have been some trippings. I won't say no. I actually think that in both cases, it could have done much, much better. But there is a basic conundrum. Similarly, there is a conundrum between the center and the state. And, you know, we are not one unified country to have one common objective and then take a decision collectively, collaboratively, and to the best interest, on the best average interest of the nation. So we pull in different directions. So there is a conundrum in the very constitutional framework that we have. That can't be tackled. So again, expediency in political management comes in play. So yes, these are challenges which are coming. But let me say, I don't think, I mean, I have some experience of having worked in other countries or having businesses in other countries. Some of the other countries have equal bit of challenges, developed countries.
Sure. Just a few more questions. One is on the land bill, and I know you've been you know, vocally talking about the need for land reform. We saw the government take a step in that direction. Again, wasn't a perfect land bill, but still, you know, it had some imperfection, but it was a significant improvement over what we were left with by the previous government. But again, we're now given to understand that it's moving back on it because of the lack of political consensus. Does that disappoint you?
Yes, it does. I think the land bill certainly has disappointing impact on everybody. Because again, I don't think land is an enabler. Land is a necessity. This is, I mean, I don't think we can say that, you know, we have land available and therefore come and invest. This is a necessary condition, but not an adequate condition. So if you're going to be faltering on the necessary condition for investments, which is the only way to grow, then I think we have deep worries. Because no matter what else you do, but if the necessary hygiene conditions are not there, such as land availability, then we have an issue. I don't know. I think the best way to deal with that is what the Prime Minister so correctly says, that I want competitive federalism, leave the state governments to compete and find their solutions to this, which would be the more expedient solution, again, coming back to it.
Sure. You know, one question on manufacturing. In the Prime Minister's Independence Day address, he made this case for linking incentives to employment generation. Now, you know, in the face of it, it seems like a good idea, but I wonder if isn't that going to be very restrictive on industry to put a mandatory employment linked incentive program?
Yes, I would think that linking incentives to job creation at the unit level, at the company organization level, is not the best way of doing it. That's my view. Doing it at an industry level is different. For example, I mean, if you say textiles is going to be employment intensive, for that matter, why manufacturing? Services are very employment intensive, right? And if therefore we want to promote some services because they are they are by genetics much more employment intensive, then that's perfectly legitimate to do this. In a way, I would say that not doing this has allowed this company to bypass a few opportunities. I mean, I'll maybe go on a bit of a tangent and say that a lot of people are gloating over the fact that we are now having a higher rate of growth than China. Actually, my view is that it is in our interest to have China grow, because if it does not grow, it will start competing in the same constituencies, in the same area that we have the competitiveness to do. Now, we saw that in Japan in the 50s, and we saw that in China the last decade, that they were systematically vacating the places where it was very employment intensive because the wage costs were going up. And so it was good to have China grow in value terms so that they can focus on other things and not on toys and textiles and Ganesh idols. So, that's employment intensive, that's something that we can do. So I would even think that Chinese growth is a good thing for us to happen.
Since you have spoken about China, I have to ask you about the move to devalue the yuan. Does that really hurt our competitiveness?
I think this is going to be a very, very challenging, very treacherous situation. In the global trade, might is right. There is no regulator for the market in the global trade. And therefore, the rules of the game are going to be laid down by the big boys. And today you have, all said and done, apart from the West, you have China as a big boy in the global trade. And if they are going to look at currency as an instrument for creating jobs or creating businesses for them, nobody can compete with China on that, because they've got the depth of the reserves and their engagement with the global trade in such a pervasive manner. It's going to be difficult for anybody to compete on this currency. India is vulnerable because you're not the big boy. Big boys are setting the game, and they're using instruments for which you don't have a competitive answer.
Sure. My last question, given this uncertain global environment and the lack of significant forward movement on reforms for whatever reasons, are you as optimistic on the India story as you were, say, a year ago, or are you now far more cautiously optimistic?
No, I continue to be optimistic about India, because I think the Indian talent, the entrepreneurship, and despite all the problems, the market mechanisms that we have, the instruments of democracy that we have, they're all there. My worry is not about that. In the core, we have that. The worry is clearly, like many others have, the fact that we're not making them functional, that we are making them dysfunctional. That's the worry. I mean, if entrepreneurship is allowed to have a free rein, then we can go places. But I think we are hemming entrepreneurship by several means. This is not something that's happening today. I think this has been the bane of this country, and I think we need to release some of these energies. I can't go into details on this, but I think this is where I see the potential. So I'm optimistic, and I'm hoping that in a democracy the voices will be heard. I mean, like Amartya Sen said, you can't have a famine in a democracy. So you can't have shall I say, subdued growth, or you can't have a famine of growth in a democracy. You've got to have the growth happening. It'll take time, it'll take through not a straight route, but a curvaceous route. It'll stumble through that, but it's got to happen.
It's got to happen. Hopefully we'll get
there.
And all the best for your innings here. Thank you so much, Mr. Seshasayee.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/etnow, and don't forget to click the like button. You can also follow us on Twitter at etnowlive. To stay updated with all our programming, hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel by logging on to youtube.com/user/etnow.